You are from Oaxaca.
Yeah.
Have you ever heard the slur Oaxaquita?
No.
You've never heard that?
No.
Oh my God! Look, this is my opportunity to reveal something horrible to you. So, in many parts of Mexico, when we want to call somebody a racial slur to call them inferior, we refer to them as Oaxaquitas because it is a known fact that the people from Oaxaca tend to be the most predominantly indigenous of all Mexico. That is a fact. I'm not sure if you're aware of that, but that is a fact. Which, to somebody like me, that's a beautiful thing. But to a racist Mexico, that's an inferior thing to be. You know what it is. So a lot of times, me growing up, when other Mexicans insulted each other, they called each other pinche Oaxaquita. Because what they're saying is pinche indio. Pinche, you get it. You get it. So I remember being a kid and hearing that. And hearing adults say to others, hey, pinche Oaxaquita cabrón. And I never even knew where Oaxaca was or what Oaxaca was at all. So my upbringing, the word Oaxaca or Oaxaquita, I understood it as something ugly, something inferior, something you don't want to be, but I never knew exactly what it was until I grew older and I realized, oh, Oaxaca is a state in Mexico. So, what about it did we gather that we decided to use Oaxaca or Oaxaquita as a slur to call other Mexicans? And then I realized, oh, it's because in Oaxaca, a lot of people tend to know they're indigenous. They embrace indigenous, and a lot of times they even speak indigenous languages in certain places, right? So I realized that the reason why it became a slur is because, oh, duh, we don't like indigenous people. We think of indigenous people as inferior. So that's why when we want to insult each other, we say pinches Oaxaquitas. Dude, that crushed me so bad when I learned how hateful we are towards our indigenous root. And I was like, wow. I remember one of the biggest insults that my father would call my mother. There's nothing you could say to my mom worse than pinche Oaxaquita. There is nothing that you could say worse. That destroyed her. You called her that. It's like you called her that chicle underneath your feet. So let me ask you a question. How does it make you feel knowing that Mexicans, when they want to insult another Mexican, in a sense to call them inferior, they call them Oaxaquitas? How does that make you feel? Honestly.
I wasn't aware, honestly, but it makes me feel more proud that I'm from Oaxaca. It makes me feel proud, honestly, that you use my state as a slur. Bro, that slur to me is beautiful, but you're taking it as a wrong, like they're using it as a wrong term. No. But I'm like kind of proud you acknowledge that, like, we're indigenous.
You want to know why you're proud? Because you are proud to be indigenous. And to you, it's like, how is that a slur? But you see, I'm not sure how aware you are, but a lot of Mexican people do not claim to be indigenous. They do not want to be. They don't want to claim it. They don't want to acknowledge it. They could look in the mirror and look just like you and I. And they'll still say, oh, I'm from Spain. Soy de España, right? So when you call them a pinche India, a pinche Oaxaquita, that's the worst you could say. Because you are calling them, you identify them as what they've been taught to be ashamed of. You get it?
Mm-hmm.
And I think more so the fact that you're from Oaxaca, because people from Oaxaca tend to be not only more predominantly indigenous, but they embrace it. They embrace it from what I've learned, from what I've observed, right? Not sure if you've experienced anything else, you being from Oaxaca. Do you feel that indigenous people there, or people there in general in Oaxaca, do you feel like, are they proud to be indigenous, or do you feel like they try to reject it?
I feel they're proud, honestly. They're proud of being indigenous, but there are people that like categorize people and like, oh, you're the indigenous, like they overlook them. And I feel that's not right. If you like overlook somebody just because like they're more indigenous than the other one, has more European features and stuff. But they're pretty proud.
That's what I've discovered. That's what I've noticed whenever I see, people from Oaxaca, whether they speak, the indigenous language or not. They tend to be very proud, at least from my observation, that y'all tend to be very proud of being indigenous. And unfortunately, due to the fact that y'all acknowledge that you're indigenous and embrace it, and many times speak an indigenous language, other Mexicans look down upon people of Oaxaca because of that. It's like, oh, son Oaxaquitas allá, I want to share a story with you.
Okay.
I met this girl, and she looked a lot like you. And she was from Oaxaca too, right? We went on a date. She was working towards becoming a teacher. So as we were on our date, hanging out, I asked her, what makes you want to be a teacher? What inspired you? And she says, I want to educate our people, right? So I said, who's our people? And she says, Hispanics. And I said, okay. You consider yourself Hispanic? I asked her. She said, yeah, of course. I said, okay, carry on. And she said, don't you? No, I don't. And she says, you're not Hispanic? What are you then? I said, well, it doesn't matter. You're telling me your story. I was just trying to make sure who your people were. Just carry on with your story. And she says, no, you're not Hispanic? Because she was confused. At this point, she probably was assuming that I wasn't even Mexican. You get me? Because of my statement. So I said, no, of course not. She says, what are you? I said, I'm Mexican. And she says, yeah, you're Hispanic. I said, no, I'm indigenous. And she says, oh. I said, aren't you? She says, no. I said, you're not? She says, no. I said, you descend from Spain? She says, yeah. And you know this because you took a DNA test? You know this because it was knowledge passed down from your great-grandparents? Or how do you know this for sure? She says, well, no, I've never done a DNA test or anything. Or, it's common sense that we are descendants of Spain. And I said, how is it common sense? She said, we speak Spanish. We have Spanish names and stuff. Said, and so that identifies us as people of Spain? She said, when you say you're indigenous, why don't you have an indigenous name? Why don't you have speak an indigenous language? I said, it's due to ethnic cleansing. Do you know what that is? And she stays quiet for a little bit. And I say, when I look at you, I see indigenous people. And her body language, her face expression, it's almost like I insulted her. She got very uncomfortable when she says, but I'm not them. I said, I'm telling you, when I look at you, your facial features, your eyes, your cheekbones, everything about you, you're indigenous. No, I'm not from a tribe. I said, do you want to know why you're not from a tribe? And she didn't say anything. She just looks at me. All of us people that once upon a time were Zapotec, Mixtec, no more. The real reason why, although you're obviously indigenous and so am I, we only identify by what the colonizers wanted us to identify. And so, coming back in full circle, that's the reason why I don't identify as Latino, Hispanic, Mestizo, and whatever other garbage they throw at us, right? Because I know that aside from the fact that Europeans arriving here attempt to wipe us out, literally, after we still survived, then they use their systemic effort to try to tell us, you no longer could speak your languages. You no longer could identify by tribe. You now had to identify as a Latino, as a Mestizo, as a Hispanic. So now we're here. Now you're here. A woman who, when I see, I see an indigenous woman. My whole life I thought I was a Latina and I thought I was Hispanic. But then I realized I'm not. So then what am I? And that is the perfect example of our condition as a whole. Is the fact that they wanted us. They wanted us to not know who we are. So now you see a lot of us talking about, I'm a proud immigrant. I come here to work hard, you see? So there's an agenda to make us feel like we're the immigrants. And who is trying to make us feel like we're the immigrants? The immigrants.